everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Lake Protectors podcast. This week, we are joined by Ashley Sullivan from the Rozalia Project. And as you can see, we are filming remotely. So, Ashley, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Hi, Lindsay. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a treat.
Yeah, well, again, we appreciate it. We, of course, have been trying to get you in the office. We had a little issue with our office and whatnot, so we're doing this remotely, but we'll definitely get you down next year. So first, I just want to go through and, of course, welcome you and just get a little background on who you are and how you ended up at the Rozalia Project.
Yeah, that's always an interesting story. I get asked that quite a bit. My name is Ashley, and I'm the executive director of the Rozalia Project. Rozalia Project is a nonprofit organization that is working to clean and protect our waterways, so our rivers, our lakes, and our oceans, and trying to conserve a healthy, thriving marine ecosystem. And when looking to tackle that, one of our waterways' greatest threats is the problem of marine debris, so our trash in the water. And I stumbled upon this work. Well, I shouldn't say stumbled. I mean, it's very intentional, but I grew up on an island in South Florida, and I'm tuning into you right now from Burlington, Vermont.
Yeah.
We have a huge lake, which I know we're going to talk about in a little bit, Lake Champlain. And when I'm not in Vermont, I'm also working on the ocean, because ultimately all of our trash through our rivers and our estuaries and lakes ends up in our ocean. So I spend a lot of time on the ocean, and I grew up on the ocean. I grew up on an island in South Florida called Key Biscayne, and have been sailing from a really, really young age. Had my own boat by the time I was 10.
Oh my gosh.
And it was something that I just always loved to do, not really in a competitive sense, but more in the ability that the boat gave me to connect with nature and the world around me. And I think that anyone that has spent time on our public waterways, you can't help but see the threat of our trash that ends up in those spaces. So a dear friend of mine, Rachel Miller, founded Rozalia Project in 2009. And I have been working on the team since 2017. So it's been about 8 years in this role.
So I know that all of the work that you guys do at the Rozalia Project is in regard to marine debris, but what is marine debris? What does that encompass?
Yeah, marine debris, I think the best way to look at that is our trash that is ending up in our public waterways. So things that are pollutants, non-organic materials that are ending up in our rivers and our lakes and our ocean. And they're all pretty much human generated. We as an organization kind of tackle that, Lindsay, in a couple different buckets. And so you can look at marine debris as consumer debris. So think about things that we use every day. It could be a lot of single-use items, straws, cups, takeout containers, food wrappers, plastic bags. But we also see a lot of debris ending up in the ocean from the fishing industry, for example. Here in New England, we do a lot of work in the Gulf of Maine. Everybody is very familiar with the Gulf of Maine and one of their favorite crustaceans, which is the lobster.
Yeah.
And that industry has a lot of waste as a result of it. And that debris ends up along our shorelines and along the bottoms of the ocean. And then a lot of times the big stuff that's out there floating around in the ocean and in our public waterways has the opportunity to break up into smaller, tinier pieces, what we call microplastics, which are things that are, think of like a grain of rice. And those can be, as I mentioned, bigger items like a soda bottle that breaks up into a small, tiny piece, or it could be a microplastic that was designed to be small, like think of glitter or like a tiny plastic
Mm,
toy or something kind of like that.
face
So
washes
that's
from
pretty
our
much
youth.
what marine debris is.
Yeah. I also was having a conversation with one of our educators the other day he had just read an article about like really like fast fashion synthetic clothing. And as you're washing it and it breaks down in your washing machine, whatever that may be, could be, of course, causing damage or at least getting those microplastics out into a public sewer system or, certainly in someone's leach field or septic tank, which is just, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Microfibers are textiles, and that could be
Hmm.
coming from, the clothes that you and I are wearing. It could be also be coming from other fabrics like our couch or furniture,
Right.
rugs, and we know that the washing machine is a source of microfiber pollution, but also so are our dryers. If you think about, doing a load of laundry and cleaning out your dryer vent, that
Yeah.
lint is essentially microfiber pollution, and it's catching quite a bit, but
Right.
quite a lot of it is also uh, getting out into our environment as well.
Okay. I know. I think when I always think of marine debris, like at least in my world, I'm thinking of like the styrofoam, like the coffee cups and things that, unfortunately you might see floating or just like trash in the park or whatnot. So certainly all of those things are encompassed in it. But I like that you said consumer waste. It's more than just the things that are like maybe physically a plastic because everything has some type of plastic in it these
It
days.
seems like more and more the top items that we're finding globally are made up of plastic materials. That wasn't always the case, but the more plastic that the world produces, the more of it that's going to end up in our public waterways. And of course, I think a lot of people think of trash and marine debris as litter, right? Like lake litter,
Hmm.
beach litter, people that are picnicking. And while that certainly is a source, so much of it also comes from faraway places, like way up in a watershed, like in a mountain
Right.
town, for example, where you all are. There's lots of rivers and tributaries that end up into Lake George or end up in Lake Champlain. And so this debris is traveling, and our changing climate is also contributing to that. So the heavier rains that we
Mm,
have, the flooding that we have, this can bring things, not just consumer debris. For example, last year we did a cleanup here on Lake Champlain, and wouldn't you believe the craziest thing that we found? It was a bowling ball,
what?
right?
Like a
And
weighted bowling ball that had just gotten
yes,
carried in some type of rainstorm or flood event?
yes. And I imagined it
Wow.
coming from way up the Winooski River,
Yeah.
probably up in a mountain town like Montpelier that got flooded out in our recent storms that we had in 2024 and in 2023. And maybe it was, Uncle Jimmy's old bowling ball up in the garage that got swooped away and ended up literally on the shores of Lake Champlain. I couldn't believe it.
That is wild. Yeah, I guess you wouldn't necessarily think of that. So, I mean, certainly that something like that ending up in the water, probably, unless you have someone physically cleaning it up, would be there for a very long time and continue to deteriorate. So when we're talking about marine debris and the harm it causes to the environment, certainly there's chemicals, those plastics, but then there's also this huge wildlife component within it, right?
Definitely, definitely. So as you said, spot on. Like all of this stuff is made up of materials that are not natural. They have
Right.
been polymers that have been created, and so all of this is breaking up into small pieces, and they become persistent organic pollutants in our waters that are bioaccumulating and become bioavailable to
Right.
every animal in the food chain, from the smallest of critters. So think of our like
Mm.
zooplankton and our
Yeah.
phytoplankton all the way up to our seabirds.
Hmm.
So, it's very As we know, plastic is not nutritious. And so, having a belly full of plastic, it can cause lots of problems.
Right.
And the more science and the more studying that we do, we are starting to understand the effects that these plastics are having on reproductive systems,
Right.
they are endocrine disruptors. So they definitely are wreaking havoc.
Right. Well, and on the fish populations, and like you said, the bioaccumulation, if it is having an effect on the zooplankton and that trickles all the way up through the entire food web and the whole ecosystem, by the time that, seagull is eating a fish in the water, how many levels of that marine debris have already been ingested by the prior species of whatever it is it's eating? So, Lake George, of course, flows into Lake Champlain. So anything that goes on in our water body, there's about a 300-foot drop. But, Lake George is, of course, going to have an effect on Lake Champlain just by the flow of that water. So marine debris, anything flowing down our way, there's a little dam up there, but, certainly could make its way down into Lake Champlain. We are really, I think, just starting the process of this marine debris education here on Lake George. Of course, people know about it, have had conversations about it, but what are you guys doing up in Lake Champlain in regards to marine debris education, whatnot?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, Rozalia Project, we've been around since 2009. And really, one of the driving factors of our work was really trying to understand marine debris. So doing cleanups, but a major part of our work is collecting
Right.
data on all the stuff that we're finding, because that data tells the story and it also
Hmm.
helps us drive solutions.
Right.
So education is one of those solution pieces, because when we can educate about marine debris, we are ultimately trying to prevent the problem of marine debris.
Yeah.
And as an organization, focusing on data cleanups as a part of every single education program, you can then spin off into a lot of different areas, including what we were just talking about bioavailability. So how do you introduce young learners to the concepts of bioaccumulation? We have these plastics that are accumulating in our food chain. So creating activities, lesson plans that kind of take a deeper dive into that. We also look at marine debris education as a lens to introduce ins and outs of packaging. When you think about,
Right.
packaging, for example, and if you look at like a carton of eggs, we've really seen an evolution of egg packaging. Back in the
Right.
day, it was like styrofoam, right?
Yes.
And now that material has changed to sometimes hard plastic. And then sometimes we can also see an egg carton that might actually be made from cardboard. So
Yes.
getting, young people to think about the different types of materials, the impact that those materials have on our environment, what it takes to make these materials, and the life cycle of these materials.
Yeah.
Um, and so and ultimately, I think using the cleanups as a way to motivate people, have them to connect with this debris. And ultimately, what we have found is that when folks participate in a beach cleanup, there's awesome satisfaction of making a really cool place in nature all of a sudden super clean. But when you start to take a deeper dive into that data is there's going to be something in there that is screaming at you, something that you want to tackle, whether it's straws or plastic bags. And then, talking about ways that we can work to create behavior change, because
Right.
that's ultimately what we're trying to do. Education programs can create behavior change.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but also so can um media and think of like awareness campaigns on a bigger
Hmm.
scale, things like policies and regulations and rules and laws, those affect the behaviors that we have as a
Right.
community and as a society. So there's lots of different ways that we can dive into creating change,
Right.
also innovation and redesign. I love to use the idea or the example rather of the water fountain, the public water fountain. You know, when I was young, the water fountain, you went to it, you drank on demand from the water fountain. But
Mm-hmm.
now, you know, water fountains actually, you can still do that, but they may also have a reusable water bottle filling station with a little
Yes.
digital ticket that shares how many plastic water bottles you've saved. And those subtle changes and redesigns of something that we're all so familiar with and using all the time is an encouraging factor that can contribute to reducing your single-use plastics, raising
Right.
awareness of the impact that these are having on our environment, and redesigning of something that we use every day into a better thing.
Right. A better habit. I think of that with reusable grocery bags. Like
Mm-hmm.
here in New York State, at least in the northern part of the state, reusable or single use plastic are not permitted to be used unless it's for like the meat or fresh produce, whatnot. But it takes a while. I was someone who I forgot my reusable bags for a year and would have to, shamefully like walk myself back to my car to get them. But things become habit and it does happen on somewhat of a short time scale. That law went into effect just a few years ago and it is just the way of life now. And if you forget them, you got to use your paper bags, but that behavioral change from regulation has been pretty fluid, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that what we've seen back to the data is that when you introduce these policies, number one, data for marine debris cleanups can help drive solutions,
Yeah,
help us recognize what are the low hanging fruit that we
right.
need to go after in policy, whether it's a plastic bag ban or banning some single use items, banning styrofoam, which New York and Vermont have done in
Yep,
foodware. But then that data long term can also show us that after these regulations and laws have been implemented, that we're actually reducing these materials in the marine environment by continuing to
right,
do cleanups, which is really cool to see too.
right. So what type of data, when you guys are doing these cleanups, you've got groups of people that are cleaning up the shoreline. Do they go into the water or just the shoreline?
Mostly just the shoreline. You know,
Okay.
there's lots of different groups doing all different kinds of work.
Yeah.
Rozalia Project has been most successful in employing our strategies of education, cleanup work, science research, innovation, all driving solutions, but really sticking to uh, urban, inland, coastal waterways, because what we know about marine debris is that like 80% of it is coming from land. So we really
Right.
focus on our
The
shoreline.
land. Yep.
And when we pick up the debris, as I mentioned before, we've got categories of in the consumers, the consumer debris, packaging, food wrappers, also personal hygiene, textiles, clothes,
Hmm.
shoes. But we also have fishing gear, fishing
Yep.
categories, not so much in Lake Champlain. We don't see a ton of it, but in the Gulf of Maine, we most certainly do. And then we also capture things that are a little bit harder to know what they are, like um, small and large micro foam, but also microplastics. And those plastics can be
Right.
hard or they can be film. Think of like a shredded plastic bag
Yep.
and the like. Yeah. And so we kind of collect data in two ways. If we're doing a community outreach event and everybody's kind of picking up trash for the first time, we might collect all that debris, take that, 5 bags, 10 bags of trash, and then we'll dump it on a tarp. And go ahead and sort everything into all those different categories. So that's one way we can do it. And
Yeah.
I love doing it that way because people can really see all the stuff and then they start to see the piles of all the plastic bags and all the metal cans and all the
Right.
plastic water bottles. And that can also be inspiring
That's an
and
incredible visual just to see everything all sorted and what the predominant, pollutant is of the day. Yeah, I think that's great.
yeah. And I also, a couple years ago, my husband helped me make these little, flags. So for every category, I have like a little piece of 2x4.
Hmm.
It almost looks like a little boat with a stick with a little flag on it that has the item number, like foam, or not the item number, but has the actual name, like plastic
Right.
bags, personal hygiene. And so it creates a really unique visual and helps people when you start getting into the sorting. Where do all the metal caps
Right.
go? Where do all the bottle tops go? So we do that often. And then other times, if we're with an experienced group, we will actually collect data in real time. So you might have one data collector that's got the data card and a clipboard, and then your other two or three folks are walking along the shoreline, and in real time, as they're picking up an item, they're calling out what that item is, and
Mm.
you're recording it. That way you don't have to touch the trash twice, and you're collecting
Right.
the information that you need.
Right. Right. So we do our cleanup day. This will be the third time that we do our annual Lake George cleanup day. Last year was my first year doing it. This year it's on September 14th. The most common thing that I saw, or at least seemed to be, were like little plastic water bottle, Gatorade, whatever, like the bottle caps. That definitely seemed that. And of course, cigarette butts. But the most predominant thing that seemed to be pulled up on the beach in the sand. And it makes sense because people are at the beach for the day and, take the can off or take the cap off. Ideally everyone's picking up those things. Unfortunately, they don't, which is how we end up in the, cleanup situation in and of itself. But yeah.
Yeah, and when we think about redesign, the bottle cap is such a good one because you've probably seen like the water bottle that has the cap attached.
Yes, I have.
Like, how
Which is,
amazing. What a great
yeah.
idea.
Right. Let's eliminate the potential for this little thing to, float off who knows where. So the Rozalia Project is part of the Lake Champlain Marine Debris Coalition. Can we chat a little bit about that? Because, of course, the LGA is now a part of this as well.
Absolutely. It's so exciting. Rozalia Project has been working on marine debris, as I've said before, for a long
Yeah.
time, over about 15 years.
Yeah.
And have been collecting data all along. So we've got this pretty big data set of marine debris in Lake Champlain specifically. And a few years back, I had a colleague that became the Lake Champlain lake keeper. Her name is Julie, and she's with the Conservation Law Foundation. They're also a partner in the coalition. And one of the things she wanted to tackle, besides invasive species and other pollutants in the water like phosphorus, and she said, Ashley, I'm really interested in marine debris. Where do you think the focus should be? So we had a hard look at the data, and what the data was showing us was that we had an awful lot of foam, styrofoam, that was ending up in Lake Champlain. And this big foam was breaking up into little pieces of foam. And when we started to look at sources of where this stuff was coming from, we realized that not only was styrofoam foodware a source,
Right.
but in a lot of our rivers and lakes, we have foam docks. And those docks are
Okay.
oftentimes what we would call unencapsulated, just big blocks of foam that are exposed to the environment, that might have a big piece of wood on top of it that you walk along to get onto
Right.
your boat or jump off to swim. But underneath you have this foam, and over time it begins to degrade and breaks up into small pieces. So this foam really became a big issue. And when we started looking at other organizations that were also in Lake Champlain specifically, as well as Lake George, that were concerned about marine debris in the lake, this group began to develop. And it is has since now been organized through some funding from NOAA through Sea Grant on Lake Champlain to develop the first community marine debris coalition on Lake Champlain. And because the Lake George Association is a part of the Lake Champlain watershed, we thought, hey, we're going to include you all too.
Yeah.
So the coalition is made up of the Lake George Association, the Conservation Law Foundation, Lake Champlain Sea Grant, which includes our university here in Burlington at UVM, but also the university in SUNY Plattsburgh in upstate New York, Rozalia Project, the Lake Champlain Committee, which is doing a lot of great work in the region, and lastly, the Vermont Boat and Marine Association. And so we were awarded funding for 3 years to develop this coalition with three main goals. And the first goal is really to expand and unify this coalition. So we've got kind of our founding core members, but really reaching out and trying to share our story, raise awareness about marine debris, and get other organizations and community members involved in the coalition. Secondly, educate youth that are facing climate and economic justice vulnerabilities and educate them about marine debris, the issue of marine debris. And then lastly, third is to provide technical support and outreach to marinas, lakeshore businesses, private dock owners, and recreational lake users to highlight the problem of marine debris and also to share about the foam issue.
Right.
One interesting thing I'll note is that right around the time that this coalition came together, the state of Vermont actually using our data, but also understanding the problem that this foam was having in our environment. The state of Vermont, through our Flood Safety Recovery Act in 2024, so June of 2024, actually banned unencapsulated foam docks.
Oh, wow.
So Vermont now has a ban. So going forward, legacy docks can remain. Right. There's not really like a phase out program, but when you get a new dock, that dock has to be encapsulated. It cannot be this exposed foam. And that also goes for buoys and other types of floats that are used in the marine industry. So that's a really great step. And Rozalia Project and the coalition in general, our role is to really help the state to educate the public about this new law and how they are being impacted and what they can do to be better stewards of the lake surrounding marine debris.
Right. I had a conversation with the Lake George waterkeeper, Chris Nowitzki, went after talking about the foam docks. I don't think we have too many down here on Lake George. A lot of what we're actually seeing now are when people are putting docks in, they're doing the Trex, which I don't know if that has any, I mean, it is a plastic, but I don't know how, the breakdown process of it. It does seem to be quite hardy. But I can remember I grew up on the Sacandaga, and I remember someone having a dock that had like laundry detergent containers under it. Like that type of, we're talking many, many moons ago, but something like that would break down so horribly over many years of time. All right, I want to segue because you guys do one of the coolest things. I spiraled for like over an hour one day looking at all that you guys do on your research vessel. So I want to talk about that. It's called American Promise, right?
Yes.
Yes. So tell me, and I know when we have communicated several times, you're like, I'm on expedition. I just got back. I'm in Maine. So I want to hear all about, and I know our listeners will too, your research vessel and what it is that you guys do out there while you're navigating around the northern part of the Atlantic.
Awesome. Yeah. American Promise is a great vessel. So as I mentioned before, when we started Rozalia Project 15 years ago, we were sailors, and it made sense that we got a boat to get out there and see marine debris in the wild and pick it up and learn more about this problem. And research vessels, a lot of organizations have them. Typically, they're big diesel engines, and they cost a lot of money to operate.
Yeah.
And not to say that American Promise isn't an expensive boat, because she is, and she's our biggest asset. But it just made sense that we would have a sailing research vessel.
Yeah.
So we started looking around for a boat, and we came across American Promise. And American Promise, is worth mentioning that she has a really sweet spot in American sailing history because she was built in 1985 by Ted Hood, who was a very famous boat builder, but also a sailmaker and an innovator, and won the America's Cup. And he built the boat for a Mainer by the name of Dodge Morgan, who was the first American to challenge the solo circumnavigation world record.
Mm.
So he built American Promise with the goal of sailing around the world without
Wow.
stopping,
Oh my
trying to
gosh.
break that record. And in
Yeah.
1985 and in 1986, he did that. And he traveled around the whole earth without stopping
Oh my
and broke that
gosh.
record by sailing around the world in 150 days. And so after he did that, he gave the boat to the Naval Academy in
Okay.
Annapolis, Maryland. And she was sailed as a sail training vessel for the Navy for a couple of decades. Sailed across the Atlantic a bunch of times and up the Atlantic, like the east coast of the US.
Mm-hmm.
And we are the third owner. We've had her for about 15 years.
Okay.
What makes her a great research vessel for us is that she has 9 bunks, so we can
Okay.
fill her with volunteers, people that join us
Right.
from all around the world. Last year, we had over 60 volunteers from 9
Oh my
different
gosh.
countries,
Wow.
and we can sail to remote islands, but also to
Mm-hmm.
coastal communities and stay in these regions, in these areas for extended periods of time with completely self-sufficient with all of our own food and all of our
Right.
own water, and the equipment that we need to get on these islands and do this big debris cleanup work. A lot of times people ask me, "Oh, do you bring the trash on board the boat?" And, she definitely has room to store a few bags, maybe 10, 20 bags at the most. But a
Right.
lot of times we partner with barge companies, land trust organizations, fishermen, local landowners, and use other vessels, like think of an aluminum landing craft, to then help
Right.
us load up that debris, get it to the mainland, where we've also staged dumpsters for recycling or landfill, depending on what the debris is. So when we're on the research vessel, we do 1 week to 2 week expeditions from May to October. And those expeditions can be focused on remote island cleanup, big debris, fishing gear removal, but they can also be sailing into coastal communities, delivering education programs.
Right.
And we also do science research on board the boat. And most of our science research has been around microplastics and microfiber pollution that we were talking about earlier.
Yep.
We were the first to study an entire river from source to sea in North America. We have done 2 studies on the Hudson River, both in 2016 and 2019, looking for microplastics and microfibers. And of course, we found them everywhere.
Right.
But the boat is a really special part of our work. And alongside having this boat, we've also done a lot of improvements on our vessel to make her the greenest sailing research vessel in the world. So we also have solar panels on board the boat. We have
Mm-hmm.
2 wind generators. We have a hydro generator. So we're actually able to make a lot of our own energy, and storing that on board with our battery bank. And that energy is used to power our electronics that keep us safe on board, and
Right.
run our cameras and computers and other instruments. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That is fascinating. So, do you guys reach out to communities ahead of time and say, we're going to we're going to go out on this expedition. We want to come do a cleanup on your island?
Yeah, a lot of times what I have learned is well, a couple things. One, we hear about places where there are debris. So we will
Okay.
get contacted by, could be a federal agency like U.S. Fish and Wildlife or the National Park
Right.
Service, for example. Think of Acadia National Park in
Mm-hmm.
Maine. There is a federal wildlife refuge that makes up over 150 islands that are managed by the federal government in Maine. Maine has
Okay.
over 4,600 islands. It might be a landowner that calls us.
Right.
I have learned in this work that it's always helpful when you're
Mm-hmm.
nomadic and traveling on a sailboat to go to communities where people want you, right? Where maybe they've
Right.
reached out ahead of time and they can be your boots on the ground and help make those connections with community in those towns. So and then also, we've identified too, as far as debris, similar to on our lakes and rivers, where those hotspots are, right? Where the predominant winds blow, where the long fetches are, those, south and north facing coves, east facing coves tend to accumulate a lot more debris than others. Maine has some kind of gradual shorelines that kind of come up to rocky beaches. And then you've
Okay.
probably also seen those like bold face
Oh,
rocks.
yeah.
Those types of areas, those bold face rocks don't collect as much debris, let's say, as a rocky shoreline or a rocky
Right.
beach. Yeah. And then, we might get calls from museums or summer camps
Hmm.
or schools. And, those are the types of communities that we also will travel to provide educational programs as well in the summer.
Right. What's your favorite place that you have ever traveled to on American Promise?
Oh, gosh. There are so many, but we just finished an expedition um, in an area called Isle Ho. And
Okay.
Isle Ho is a beautiful remote island in the Gulf of Maine. There's probably maybe 30 year-round residents.
Oh, wow.
It swells quite a bit in the summertime. The southern part of the island is owned by the national park.
Okay.
So I love that island because every time we go, we get an opportunity to work with all different kinds of people. We can work with tourists. We can work with kids from the local school, community members, fishermen, the National Park Service,
Right.
private landowners. And it's really a bit of like a trifecta of all the different people that make up these island communities. And we always seem to have a really memorable time. And we've gotten to the point where we keep returning to the same places. So we've got these really interesting data sets, and I can put a flyer all around town or through our partners and
Right.
get community members picking up trash before we arrive and tagging those bags, which beaches they came from, what day they did the cleanup, how many people were they. And then we will do like a mass sort where we'll collect all that data and then help facilitate getting the trash off island. So those types of partnerships are always really fun.
Yeah. What is a day in the life like on the boat? I mean, going from, I'm sure it depends on if you're having like a full sail day or actually arriving at a place, but what is it? To me, it seems very serene and relaxing, but I know it's a lot of hard work and you guys are working probably 24 hours a day.
Yeah, it's always a lot of logistics, ahead of
Yeah.
time to kind of pull all the pieces together. But, when you jump on the boat, absolutely, you're going to have moments of just serene
Yeah.
sailing in nature. And the Gulf of Maine for sailors, it's a bucket list. It's like going to the Sea of Cortez or
Right.
sailing in the Mediterranean. It's such a beautiful landscape. And so there's certainly moments like that where our volunteers are learning how to sail and becoming familiar with the Maine coast. And when we're sailing along, we might see whales or,
Hmm.
you know, f- fish like mola mola, huge sunfish, or bald eagles and seals. It's like so amazing. But
Yeah.
uh, sometimes when we reach our destination and we're actually getting to work, the typical day starts around 7. We have all of our community meals together on the boat.
Right.
So we might have breakfast and kind of recap what we're going to be doing for the day. Let's say we're doing a cleanup, and then we load up all of our equipment. We dress like we're going to be working hard with long pants, long shirts, hiking boots. And then we'll jump into our smaller dinghy
Okay.
and use that dinghy to get ourselves, because usually American Promise is either anchored or on a mooring inside a harbor. And then we'll use our smaller dinghy, which it's about a 12-foot inflatable that has a 20-horse motor on it. We'll load up everybody in there with our lunches and all of our cleaning tools and supplies and head into the island. And then we'll mostly spend like all day on island from usually about 9 a.m. to about 3 or 4. I find 6
Okay.
hours with lunch in the middle is kind of a good chunk of time for people to
Okay.
really get to work. Uh, yeah. And then, I always like to say that conservation work can be fun. And we have, while sometimes, cleaning up beach after beach after beach, it can feel a little doom and gloomy of like, oh my gosh, what are we doing to our environment? So we always try to sprinkle lots of fun and joy. And so after, a hard day of cleaning up, we might come back to the boat and everyone may go swimming, or we might go for a sunset hike, share dinner together,
Yeah.
and make our plans for the next day, and then get rocked to sleep by a gentle swell, and
Yeah.
then get up and do all over it again.
That sounds lovely. How would someone go about volunteering and going out on one of these trips with you guys?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that, because we do accept volunteers.
Yeah.
We typically, I would say the best thing to do is to jump on our website and sign up
Okay.
for our newsletter, or also follow us on social media. We are
Okay.
on Instagram and
Yep.
Facebook at Rozalia Project, and that's Rozalia
Yep.
Project.
Okay.
And we put out a call for crew usually around February, once we get all of our funding together and figure out what we're going to be able to accomplish that coming season. And we ask folks to either make a video or share a letter about why they want to get involved. Why is this work important to them? What are they looking to get out of it? What do they
Right.
think that they can contribute?
Yeah.
If you have a resume, great. Maybe you have some specific skills that are really helpful for us, like you're a photographer or a podcaster or
Right.
um, a teacher or a fisherman or an engineer or a policy person. And then you interview, and we start putting together and selecting folks to build that crew. So that's a little bit about the process. And then there's forms and things like that. But
Yeah, of course.
uh, yeah.
That sounds really, really fun. And what a unique experience for people to get out there and do this with you guys. What else can listeners do just in their general everyday lives? I mean, of course, we don't want anyone to pollute and throw anything on the ground litter wise. Of course, that's number one. But is there anything else that folks can do?
I was thinking a little bit about this before this podcast, and I would say that, the quick and dirty is, we are all using consumer items.
Right.
And there's probably something that that you could substitute, such as a reusable coffee mug
Yeah.
or a metal straw or a reusable water bottle, reusable bags. Those are kind of simple, what I would say, low hanging fruit to
Yep.
kind of reduce the amount of plastic that we're all using. But on a bigger scale, I was thinking about, there's a woman by the name of Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, and she has created a climate action Venn diagram worksheet that is
Okay.
really interesting, because what she challenges you to do is to, and if you think of a Venn diagram, you've got those three circles,
Circles.
right?
Yep.
And then all those circles come together. And so in one circle, reflecting on, like, what are you good at? So where are your areas of expertise? What can you bring to the table? What do you have to offer? And then the second circle is what needs doing, right? Like, what do our public waterways need?
Right.
Um, what are the challenges that the ocean is facing? And think of it as maybe more of a systemic and a scalable thing that we're trying to accomplish, right? And then also the third circle is what brings you joy, right? Like, what gets
Mm.
you out of the bed in the morning?
Right.
And if you kind of focus on those three things, what you're good at, what does the ocean need, and then what brings you joy, in the middle, you're going to find your golden ticket, right? Like,
Right.
what can you contribute? And I think that is a really helpful tool to help steer you in the right direction of what can you do to
Right.
contribute. Her name is Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, but if you just Googled, climate action Venn diagram, she has a
Okay.
whole website. And she has a really great book called What If We Get It Right?
Okay.
That just really is challenging all of us to lean into these climate problems,
Right.
because I always like to use the analogy of, we were talking about behavior change before, of COVID. And, when COVID happened, right? Like, all of a sudden it was this big global emergency. There was this virus. And if we got it and we spread it around, like, we were going to kill one another.
Right.
And so, really quickly, humans were able to shift and change their behavior when it
Yeah.
mattered most, because we
Right.
were trying to keep each other safe,
Right.
wearing masks, overnight. And I think that's a really great metaphor for what humans can accomplish on a global scale when it matters most.
Right.
And marine debris is one of those threats. Climate change is one of
Absolutely.
those threats. And so, yeah, I think that there's something that all of us can do.
Yeah.
And it's just finding that sweet spot of what it is that you enjoy, what you're good at, and what you think the ocean needs.
And it does happen pretty seamlessly, like thinking of the changes that we make every day, or forced changes that happen really rapidly. So yeah, we will link all of these in our episode description. Ashley, thank you so, so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. Like I said, we'd love to get you down to Lake George next year, but any final thoughts before we sign off?
Well, thank you so much for this
Yeah.
opportunity. It was so great. And I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person. And I
I feel
can't wait to come and learn about what you all are doing on Lake George, and look forward to continue our collaboration with the coalition and introducing the challenges that marine debris poses in our environment and in us. So thanks so much for this opportunity, and look forward to making new friends, because they're going to learn about us on this podcast. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ashley. And we appreciate it, everyone. We will see you next time. Bye. The Lake Protectors podcast is a production of the Lake George Association. To check out the work that the LGA is doing, follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Lake George Association. You can also visit our website at lakegeorgeassociation.org. This episode was produced by Jacqueline Mignot. If you'd like to hear more, follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.